The 29th of December, 1972, Florida Everglades. Something felt off. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. A passenger near the window looked out, expecting to see city lights below. Miami should have been glowing by now, but there was nothing, just darkness. Endless, thick darkness. The engines hummed steadily. No panic, no warning. But then, a sudden drop. Not sharp, not violent. Just enough to make a few heads lift. Eyes searching. A strange feeling in the stomach. Like the plane was slowly sinking. No one screamed. Not yet, because no one understood what was happening. And then, everything broke. Metal tore through the silence. The ground came up fast, too fast. A violent crash ripped the aircraft apart, throwing passengers into chaos, into darkness, into water and mud. In seconds, everything changed. But this didn't start here. The 26th of December, 1972, New York City. It was supposed to be a routine flight. Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was scheduled to travel from New York to Miami. A common route, nothing unusual. The aircraft, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, was one of the most advanced planes of its time. Reliable, modern, trusted. Inside the cockpit were three experienced men. Captain Robert Loft, First Officer Albert Stockstill, Flight Engineer Donald Repo. They had done this flight many times before. The weather was clear. The aircraft was in good condition. Passengers boarded without concern. Luggage loaded. Doors closed. Everything was normal. Too normal. Because somewhere in that routine, something small had already begun to go wrong. Something no one would notice until it was too late. The plane was approaching Miami. Everything was on schedule. Smooth descent, calm skies, routine landing ahead. Inside the cockpit, the crew prepared for final approach. Gear down, speed adjusted. Checklists moving forward, step by step. Then something didn't match. A small green light. It was supposed to turn on, confirming the nose landing gear was locked in place. But it didn't. Just darkness where there should have been certainty. The crew noticed immediately. Captain Robert Loft leaned forward. First Officer Albert Stockstill checked again. Flight Engineer Donald Repo looked over the panel. No green light. That didn't mean the gear had failed. Sometimes it was just the bulb. A simple issue. Common. Fixable. But they couldn't take that risk. Not with a full flight. So they paused the landing. The aircraft was instructed to enter a holding pattern over the dark, empty stretch of the Florida Everglades. No city lights. No visual reference, just blackness below. The autopilot was engaged. The plane held steady at 2,000 feet, or at least it was supposed to. Inside the cockpit, all attention shifted to that one small problem. The crew removed the light assembly. They tried to check if the bulb was burned out. They leaned closer, focusing on something no bigger than a fingertip. Three experienced men, all looking at the same tiny light. At some point during this, the control column was slightly bumped. It wasn't a strong movement, barely noticeable, but it was enough. The autopilot quietly disconnected from altitude hold. No alarm sounded. No warning flashed. The aircraft began to descend, slowly, almost gently, from 2,000 feet to 1,900, then lower. The crew didn't notice. They were still focused on the light, still trying to solve a problem that didn't seem dangerous. Outside, there was nothing to give them a clue. No horizon, no ground lights, just endless darkness, swallowing the aircraft inch by inch. Inside the cabin, passengers sat unaware. Some relaxed, some tired. No one knew the plane was no longer level. No one felt the slow descent. And in the cockpit, no one was watching the altitude. And this is where the silent fall truly begins. The plane kept sinking. 2,000 feet was already gone. 1,500. Then lower. Still no alarms. No sudden drop. Just a slow, quiet descent into darkness. Inside the cockpit, the crew was still focused on the light. They passed the small panel between them, trying to see if the bulb was burned out. They spoke calmly. No urgency. No sign of danger. Outside, there was nothing to see. The Florida Everglades at night is pure black. No buildings, no roads, no lights. Just endless swamp stretching for miles. No horizon, no depth, only darkness. The aircraft slipped through it like it didn't exist. Inside the cabin, a few passengers shifted in their seats. One person looked out again. Still nothing below. It felt strange. Too low, maybe. But there was no panic, no shaking, no warning. Just that quiet, uneasy feeling. Then, a voice in the cockpit. "Hey, what's happening here?" It came too late. The altimeter was dropping fast now. The ground was no longer far away. Captain Loft reacted instantly. He pulled back, tried to climb, but there was no time left. The nose lifted slightly, but the aircraft was already too low, too fast. Seconds, that's all they had. The darkness below suddenly turned into something real. Black water, thick mud, tall grass rushing up at deadly speed. Then impact. The left wing struck first. Metal ripped apart. The fuselage slammed into the swamp, breaking into sections. Seats tore loose. People were thrown violently forward. Water and mud exploded through the cabin. Screams filled the air, but only for a moment, because the crash was over almost as quickly as it began. Silence followed, broken only by distant cries and the sound of water slowly moving through the wreckage. The plane was gone. In its place, scattered debris, injured survivors, and a dark, endless swamp. And for those still alive, the real fight was just beginning. For a few seconds, no one moved. The crash had ended, but the shock had just begun. The cabin was broken apart. Pieces of the aircraft were scattered across dark water and mud. Seats were twisted, metal bent in ways it shouldn't be. Some survivors were still strapped in. Others had been thrown clear into the swamp. Then the sounds started. Low voices, pain, confusion. "Help, please." People tried to understand where they were, what had happened, but it was too dark to see clearly. There were no lights, only faint reflections on black water. The Everglades had swallowed everything. In the forward section, some passengers were badly injured. Broken bones, deep cuts. They couldn't move. Others, somehow, could. A few began to unbuckle themselves, slowly, carefully, their hands shaking, their ears still ringing from the impact. Water was rising around them, cold, thick, hard to stand in. Someone called out for their family. No answer. Another voice tried to respond, but it was weak, fading. Time felt strange, like it had slowed down. No one knew how bad it was yet. Some survivors began helping others, pulling them out of seats, trying to keep heads above water, supporting anyone who couldn't stand. But the wreckage was unstable. Pieces shifted under weight. Sharp metal edges cut into skin without warning. Every movement was dangerous. And then something worse settled in. The silence between the voices. Too many people weren't responding. The reality started to form slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a crash. It was a disaster. And they were alone. No lights in the sky. No sound of engines above. No sign that anyone knew where they were. Just darkness, water, and broken bodies scattered across a swamp. Some tried to stay calm. Others couldn't. But deep down, one thought was growing in all of them. If help doesn't come soon, this place will take the rest of us too. And far above them, somewhere beyond the darkness. No one had reached them yet. The cold began to settle in. Not all at once, but slowly. The water in the Everglades wasn't deep everywhere, but it was enough. Enough to soak clothes, enough to drain strength, enough to make every movement harder. Survivors stood, half submerged, trying to stay balanced in thick mud that pulled at their legs. Some couldn't stand at all. They were trapped in broken seats or pinned under twisted metal. The only thing keeping their heads above water was someone else holding them up. "Don't fall asleep," one voice said, over and over, because people were starting to drift. Not from comfort, but from pain, from shock, from losing energy. A few survivors moved carefully through the wreckage. Each step was slow, testing the ground before shifting weight. The mud could suddenly drop, pulling a leg down deeper than expected, and everywhere sharp edges, metal torn open like paper, jagged, hidden in the dark. One wrong step could mean another injury, but they kept moving. They had to. Some reached others and tried to free them, pulling at seats, lifting broken pieces. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Some people were too badly trapped. The water made everything worse. Tools were gone, hands slipped, Strength faded fast. And still, they tried. The night felt endless. No one knew how long it had been. Minutes? An hour? More? There were no lights, no fire, no signal. Only voices calling out, and fewer answers each time. Some survivors grouped together, not by plan but by instinct. Staying close meant warmth, meant support, meant someone would notice if you slipped under. The swamp around them stayed quiet, too quiet. No rescue, no movement in the sky, just darkness pressing in from every side. And then another fear began to grow. Not just injury, not just cold, but the thought that maybe no one knew where they were. And if that was true, this night wasn't ending anytime soon, and their strength wouldn't last forever. Time stopped making sense. The night stretched on, heavy and endless. Survivors clung to anything they could: seat cushions, broken pieces of the plane, even each other. Standing still for too long made the cold worse. Moving too much drained what little energy they had left. Every choice had a cost. Some people started shaking uncontrollably. Others went quiet, too quiet. Stay with me. Keep talking. Voices tried to keep each other awake, because sleep now felt dangerous, like something you might not wake up from. The water stayed cold, not freezing but enough to slowly take strength away. Clothes clung to skin. Mud pulled at feet. And the darkness never lifted. No moonlight strong enough to help. No nearby lights. Just shadows and shapes that barely made sense. A few survivors tried to organize things, not in any formal way, but simple actions. Keep the injured supported. Keep heads above water. Keep people together. It was the only way to hold on. Some called out into the distance, hoping anyone might hear them. Nothing came back. That silence was the hardest part, because it meant one thing. They might not have been found yet. Hours could pass before anyone even knew where to look, and by then, many wouldn't last. The pain was getting worse for some. Injuries, swelling, breathing harder, strength fading. A few people began slipping out of consciousness. Others fought to keep them awake, talking, shouting, even shaking them gently. Anything to stop them from letting go. Then, far away, a sound, faint, almost lost in the night. Some lifted their heads, listening, not sure if it was real. It came again, low, distant, an engine. Hope moved through the survivors like a sudden spark. Do you hear that? More voices joined, straining to listen. The sound grew slightly louder, still far, but closer than anything they had heard since the crash. For the first time since impact, they weren't completely alone. But whether that sound would find them in time was something no one could be sure of yet. The sound grew louder, not fast but steady, a low, distant hum cutting through the silence of the swamp. Some survivors lifted their heads higher, straining to hear. Others called out, using what little strength they had left. Here, over here. Their voices were weak, broken, but they kept trying. Above them, search efforts had already begun. When Eastern Airlines Flight 401 disappeared from radar, something was clearly wrong. Air traffic control lost contact. The aircraft never reached Miami. Within minutes, alerts were sent out. Search teams moved fast, but the Everglades made everything harder. From the air, it was almost impossible to see anything. No lights, no clear landmarks, just endless black terrain stretching in every direction. Helicopters scanned the darkness, slowly, carefully. Pilots looked down, searching for anything unusual. A reflection, a fire, movement, anything. Back on the ground, or what passed for ground survivors tried to make themselves visible. Some waved pieces of debris. Others shouted again and again. Every second mattered now. The engine sound grew closer, louder, real. One survivor pointed upward. I see something. I think. At first, it was just a faint shape. Then a light small, moving across the sky. A helicopter. Hope hit all at once. People who could barely move tried to stand taller. Others lifted their arms out of the water. Some cried out, louder than before, pushing through pain. The helicopter circled, slow, searching. It hadn't found them yet. Not fully, but it was close. Very close. Then, the beam of a searchlight cut through the darkness. It swept across the swamp, over water, over grass, over broken pieces of metal, and then it hit something. The wreckage. The light paused, moved back, focused. The helicopter hovered. They were found, but reaching them would be the next challenge. The helicopter didn't land. It couldn't. Below was nothing solid, just water, mud, and scattered wreckage. No clear space, no safe ground. So it hovered. The searchlight stayed fixed on the survivors, holding them in a bright circle against the darkness. For the first time since the crash, they could see each other clearly. Injuries, blood, faces drained of energy, but also movement, life. Rescuers quickly understood what they were dealing with. This wasn't a simple recovery. People were still alive, but barely holding on. More help was called in. Soon, additional helicopters arrived. Airboats were launched into the swamp from nearby access points. The rescue had begun, but it would take time. Back in the water, survivors waited. The noise above gave them hope, but it didn't take away the pain. Minutes felt long. Every second mattered. Then the first rescuer came down, lowered carefully from the helicopter, moving slowly through the air, then into the water. He landed near the closest group. "Stay with me. We're here." Simple words, but they changed everything. The process began immediately. The most injured were first. Rescuers moved carefully through the wreckage, checking who could be moved, who needed support, who was still conscious. Some survivors couldn't lift their heads. They were carried, held above the water, secured for extraction. Others tried to help, even in pain, pointing toward people who needed help more. One by one, survivors were lifted out, some by helicopter, others placed onto airboats as they arrived, slowly navigating through the swamp. It wasn't fast. It couldn't be. Every movement had to be careful. One mistake could make injuries worse. And still, not everyone could be saved. Some didn't respond when rescuers reached them. Some had already slipped away during the long night. The scale of the crash was becoming clear now. This wasn't just survival. It was loss. But for those still breathing, this was the moment they had been holding on for. Pulled from cold water, lifted into the air, away from the darkness, away from the swamp that almost took them. And as the helicopters rose into the night, the survivors finally left the place where everything changed. By morning, the scale of the disaster was clear. Scattered across the Florida Everglades, pieces of the aircraft, and the lives it had changed forever. Rescue teams continued working through daylight. More survivors were found. More bodies were recovered. In total, 176 people had been on board. 75 survived. 101 did not. The question came quickly. How did this happen? The aircraft was advanced. The crew was experienced. The weather was clear. Nothing about this flight should have ended like this. Investigators began their work. Carefully, step by step, they studied the wreckage, the flight data, the cockpit voice recordings, and slowly, a picture formed. It wasn't a major failure. It wasn't weather. It wasn't sabotage. It was something smaller. A single landing gear indicator light. Inside the cockpit, all 3 crew members had focused on that one problem, trying to figure out if the landing gear was locked. During that moment, the autopilot was unintentionally disengaged from altitude hold. No one noticed. The plane began to descend, slowly, silently, and with no outside visual reference in the dark Everglades. There was nothing to warn them. By the time they realized, it was too late. The official findings later confirmed it. The crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crash was caused by crew distraction and loss of situational awareness. A small issue that took all their attention. And in those moments, everything else was missed. But this tragedy didn't end there. It changed aviation. New procedures were introduced. Stronger focus on crew coordination. Systems designed to prevent this exact situation. Because of what happened that night, future crews would be trained differently. To never let one problem take all their attention. To always monitor the bigger picture. For the survivors, the memory never left. The darkness, the silence, the cold water, and the moment everything changed without warning. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't an explosion. Just a small light that didn't turn on.